The title of today's session is Using Customer Feedback to Help Shape the Transit Journey. And the session today will be facilitated by the BC Transit Corporate Strategy team, so Chelsea Carlson, Melissa Coates, and Vanessa Bocchi, and we'll focus on the Voice of the Rider Transit Experience Survey and how the survey uses the Gender-Based Analysis Plus framework to better understand how different demographic groups experience our services at BC Transit. So a very, very fascinating topic, very timely, very relevant for all of us in this call and beyond. I just wanted to say to Vanessa, Melissa, and Chelsea, thank you so much for volunteering to do this, for all your time that you have, I know, invested putting together such an engaging session today, and really for being here. We really, really appreciate all of you. So really looking forward to this today, and I'll hand over to you now. Thank you.
Today, we're just going to talk about how we use customer feedback to shape the transit journey. So I'm Chelsea Carlson, Manager of Corporate Strategy, and Melissa will join us and speak a little bit about gender-based analysis after, and then Vanessa will take us through the Transit Experience Survey feedback. So first, I just want to introduce our team. And you might notice that we're all wearing black turtlenecks today, which was not planned, but it's a dark November day out there, so it felt like the right choice. So Melissa works in corporate planning and reporting, and she works on our service plan and our annual report, as well as our corporate business plan and our divisional plans. She does a quarterly performance report for our board, as well as does some strategy and planning sessions. And then she also researches transit trends across Canada and across the world to understand what different transit agencies are doing. And she is an Idea Forum member. And then Vanessa works in market research. She does our customer engagement. So that's our Voice of the Rider customer surveys, our conventional transit surveys that we do with a third-party market research provider. And then we do our custom transit HandyDart survey and a local government partner and operating company survey. So lots of surveys, which she tracks on our public engagement calendar to make sure we're not asking too much of customers and we don't have any survey fatigue. And then she also supports the engagement platform, which is engage.bctransit.com. And then I lead the team and also work in corporate planning and reporting and make sure all of that customer feedback is incorporated into our key strategies in the organization. We've worked on the overall BC Transit strategic plan that I'll talk about in a moment, but we've also worked on a number of different strategies with different business units. So we have worked on the on-demand strategy in the early stages. We've worked on the custom transit, HandyDart 5-year strategy, the customer experience plan, which we're talking about today, as well as a number of other plans. And also I was on the Idea Forum formerly, and I will always be a supporter and a champion of this work. So that is our team. And then I just want to talk a little bit about our strategic plan and the objectives in it. So we published it in 2024. And if you haven't had a chance to read it or you're new to BC Transit, just check it out on the hub or on our website. You can read the full document there. But just a quick overview, it has 6 objectives, and those are tied to our mission and our vision. And those are always safe, engaged people and partners, satisfied customers, thriving communities, financial stewardship, and sustainable future. So each objective has a number of focus areas underneath it, and then we have a number of plans that link up to those. So the customer experience plan obviously links to satisfied customers, and then there's other plans and documents that lay out the activities and the roadmap for achieving our other objectives in the organization. So that's how it fits into the bigger picture at BC Transit. And then I want to talk a little bit about Voice of the Rider and our customer surveying and how we use that feedback. So Voice of the Rider started in 2022, and when we took it on, it had about 200 participants. So those people subscribe to be a part of our Voice of the Rider panel. They sign up through our website or through the survey platform. And now we have about 7,000 subscribers across British Columbia. We do see more subscribers from Victoria than any other region, but we're really trying to increase our regional sample size as well and hear from the other communities across BC. We do quarterly surveys, so we have a longer survey that's our customer experience survey, and then we have a transit rating survey, which is actually open right now, and we will put the links in the chat if you want to share those. And we use it to gauge overall customer feedback on the transit journey and general aspects of the transit experience, but we also use Voice of the Rider for project-specific feedback. So we've used it to ask questions more recently about different apps that people are using and how they're planning their trip. We've used it to ask questions about fare free for 12 and under. We've used it to ask questions about the rapid bus service in Victoria, so we can really dive into specific projects and get feedback for different teams across BC Transit. And we can also segment our distribution list by different regions of BC, so we can get specific feedback on different areas of the province. And then we also have our pivotal research surveys, and those are done by another company that looks across BC and has a more regional sample size for us. And so if you're wondering how this all ties into IDEA, what we've done is add a number of demographic questions to our surveys to try and understand our different riders and how they experience transit. We also try to make our surveys as accessible as possible. So online surveys is the easiest way, but we also do phone-in surveys and paper surveys to make sure we're hearing from as many people as possible who want to give their feedback. We make the demographic questions optional. As you've probably seen, we have similar questions in the West survey. So we ask people for their gender identity or their age, other identity factors, but there's always an option to say they don't want to give that information and prefer not to say. And we do see a lot of customers want to share that information, so that's really good for us to be able to track those demographics over time. So I'll just pass it over to Melissa now, who's going to talk a little bit about Gender-Based Analysis Plus and how we're using that in our customer surveys.
Okay. So we're going to dive in here and go over GBA Plus. So I'm going to probably refer to it as GBA Plus. It's just the short form of Gender-Based Analysis Plus. So before I begin explaining it, GBA Plus, I will say, is really similar to intersectionality. So if intersectionality is something familiar to you, that might also be helpful to kind of keep that in mind as well. They both really focus on different social and political identities and how they impact people in combination, not just in isolation. So GBA Plus is an analytical tool that we use to understand how different people of different genders and other social and political identities are affected by decisions, policies, or programs, or how different types of people may experience the same situation differently. So for example, I identify as a woman, but I'm also a white woman in my 30s. So you could look at my experience solely as a woman, but you would miss out, for example, because I could have a completely different experience as from an Indigenous woman in her 60s. So that's why it's really important to look at these multiple identities in combination to really understand a variety of different experiences. So Gender-Based Analysis Plus is a government term. So you'll hear it largely in government organizations. Before the plus was added to GBA Plus, it was actually just gender-based analysis, and it focused exclusively on gender. And then the plus was added later on to include all the different social and political identities, these intersecting factors that can shape people's experience. So with that in mind, the city of Edmonton actually created this really wonderful video about GBA Plus, how and why they're using it and kind of how they're applying it. So I'm going to play this and hopefully it'll do a little bit of deeper dive into GBA Plus.
Imagine a busy street that you know. A place with shops and restaurants, maybe there's a condo or two, park or school nearby. A place that is very familiar. When you look at it, you pay attention to the buildings, the people, and the traffic. But you probably notice less obvious things too. Your favorite restaurant stands out. That new shop seems intriguing. You also see the cracks in the sidewalk that are going to widen after the first freeze. And that business that never shovels after a snowfall, making the sidewalk an icy hazard. You notice these things because of your experience, your knowledge, and your reality. This is your lens. We all have one. Your view of the world is shaped by your life story. The funny thing about lenses is that we often don't know we have them. They are invisible to us because they've always been there. Lenses can be powerful. They can make things instantly visible to you that others might not see without having them pointed out. But different people have different life stories, and therefore different lenses. And different groups of people have common experiences that allow them to see similar concerns. People of different genders, for example, notice things other genders may not see. This is what we mean by gender lens. Gender is an important feature of identity that impacts what we see, notice, and feel when we look at a situation. People of different genders may not see the things that you do, but they will also see things that you don't. Just because we don't see something with our own lens doesn't mean it's not there and that it doesn't affect people. So, when someone makes decisions affecting our city, like our mayor, councillors, city employees, planners, and contractors, they need to be able to see things through many lenses. This takes training. We are all experts at seeing things through our own lens, but we're not naturally good at seeing things through others. That's why City of Edmonton employees are now taking Gender-Based Analysis Plus training, or GBA Plus for short. It's a way of making sure that different perspectives are included for good decision-making. It's about training people to add lenses to their collection to make sure our city works for everyone. And that includes the lenses of men, women, non-binary folks, Edmontonians who have different accessibility needs, as well as people from different cultures, ages, and income levels. All these lenses need to be considered too, which is why it's called GBA Plus. The plus refers to other identities, experiences, challenges, and realities. Though GBA Plus training starts with gender, it doesn't end there. It opens the door to viewing our city through many lenses and considering many perspectives. The important thing is, lenses aren't swapped. They are added. We're not trying to replace one point of view with another. We are including them all. The more lenses we add to our analysis of a situation, the more citizens we serve when we solve the problem. Changing your viewpoint from your own lens to multiple lenses can be challenging, and adding lenses can make situations that used to seem simple a whole lot more complex. But it's important to address the complexity. Humans are complex beings, and cities are complex systems. When we oversimplify decisions or prioritize the needs of one group over others, we don't create spaces that work for everyone. And it's also the standard we hold our leaders to. They have a responsibility to represent all Edmontonians, and GBA Plus is how we ensure that they are prepared to do this. So let's look at that street scene again. You may see the cracks in the sidewalk, your favorite restaurant, and that inviting park. Susan might see a lack of bright lighting. Rachel might notice the lighting too, but she also sees that the curbs don't have cutouts. Ahmed might also notice the curbs because they make it harder for him to walk with his daughter in the park. And he also sees the lack of police presence on the street. All these perspectives are valid, but if you only asked one person or group what they see, you wouldn't get the whole story. GBA Plus analysis helps us all to see the big picture and make better decisions for all Edmontonians.
Okay. Yeah, I really love this video. I feel like it does a really good job of explaining GBA Plus and like really bring in the visuals of it too. Yeah, and if you're ever looking to like share about GBA Plus with others, I highly recommend just like sending this video as an overview. It really does a great deep dive. Okay. So now I'm going to talk about kind of what GBA Plus looks like in action, and I'm going to look at this report that was done a few years ago by the Ministry of Environment on climate change, intersectionality, and GBA Plus. I'm just going to go over some of the highlights in the report. It's pretty comprehensive, so I'm just going to pop the link into the chat here as well if anyone's interested in doing a deeper dive in it. It's a pretty interesting report. Climate change is something, you know, I think we can all relate to, whether it's fires, floods, extreme heat, or atmospheric rivers. You know, these climate events can all impact us in different ways. Okay, so what this report found when they were kind of doing their analysis of climate change and how it impacted people differently, they looked at kind of where the inequities show up. But this quote is actually a direct quote from the report, and it says, systemically marginalized communities have typically contributed the least to climate change, but are disproportionately impacted by climate events. So that's kind of like one of the main themes of the report, which I thought was really interesting. So in terms of where they show up in different places, housing is a big one. So those that are housing insecure, so whether it's that being without a home or being between homes, these people are at the greatest risk of physical impacts from climate change. And climate change can also impact the availability of housing stock, which has the biggest impact for those who are lower income. In terms of health, so we have both mental health and physical health impacts that can come from climate change. So this report found that climate change in terms of mental health could lead to increased substance use. And then also kind of on like the emotional side of things, they found that women in families were providing the most emotional support to their families while also dealing with their own stress from climate-related events. In terms of physical health, there's some really specific examples, like wildfire smoke can impact pregnancies and it can actually lead to a lower birth rate. And then as well, elderly people kind of disproportionately experience negative impacts from heat waves. Gender-based violence and safety. So during climate events, there's an increased demand for transition house spots. And also many transition houses are not designed for things like cooling in a warming climate. So it can make things really challenging during these events, while these people are already experiencing kind of a lot of life stress on top of this as well. Economic livelihoods. So if children can't be in school due to some sort of climate event, it's often women who end up looking after their children and taking time away from work to do so. And they also just kind of generally experience an increase in domestic responsibilities. Wildfires and floods also can impact resource and agricultural economies significantly, and it can create an impact on the local economy and jobs. And for food security, climate-related events can disrupt food supplies or other supplies. I think, if you live on Vancouver Island, you can kind of understand how that might occur. We get a lot of imports coming in from the island, into the island, and it's more like rural communities that are food becomes more expensive, becomes more limited, and it can also disproportionately impact First Nations as well, as they are often located in more rural places. So with all this in mind, that's kind of the analysis of where the inequities show up. And then this report used that information of understanding where the inequities were, understanding who's impacted the most, to make some recommendations moving forward, to really kind of to really create a climate change plan that includes everyone and focuses on addressing these inequities. So some of the recommendations in the policy and planning area focus on investing in infrastructure, institutions, and systems for resilience, integrating climate change policy with social policy. So really focusing on how climate change can impact health, housing, economic development. Another set of recommendations was actually just improving the data collected, so both qualitative and quantitative data of people's experiences. and to better understand how other groups are impacted that we didn't even cover, that this report didn't even cover. And then as well, engagement and inclusion. So just really including these groups that are really impacted the most in any sort of planning and decision-making around climate change. And they also noted focusing on ensuring Indigenous leadership and really supporting the more rural communities within BC. So that's all I'm going to go over on that report. Again, I put that link in the chat if you're curious on reading more. It is a really interesting report, I will say that. But here are some kind of things, if you're thinking like, oh, this is really interesting, how can I start thinking about these things and applying it in my work? And I really kind of encourage you to start here, just to kind of build that self-awareness of, what assumptions are you making to begin with, and who might you be missing and who might you be leaving out when you're looking at a specific project or it's a decision, or who did you engage with to make this decision about, I don't know, a new bus route or something like that. I think there's a lot of opportunities in BC Transit to start thinking about these things, and just a big part of it is just asking these deeper questions and kind of challenging your own assumptions. Okay. So with all that in mind, I'm now going to kind of put it to everyone here. So based on this brief time we spent covering GBA Plus, what's an opportunity for BC Transit to start applying GBA Plus? And feel free to come off mute if you're feeling brave and chat about it, or if you have something that you want to share, something that you're already doing that's GBA Plus, that's great, or feel free to answer in the chat as well. Route planning and fare planning for sure. Policy development and reviews, definitely. ID projects during intake, program reviews. Event planning, yeah, definitely. That's a great one. Infrastructure planning. Yeah, it's really interesting. So our previous mandate letter from the province, it kind of included like adopting or implementing GBA Plus, and it's not just like implementing a new transit service and it's like, yes, it's here. It's kind of like it's really like challenging your assumptions and kind of growing that knowledge base and kind of working it into so many different things. So it's not something that's like, yes, we've implemented and it's done. I think it's something, it's just like the whole idea journey that, you're constantly learning and evolving and then trying to apply it to your work as well. Yeah, I think there's some really great ideas here, and I love this. So I hope everyone can kind of keep thinking on how they can apply things. And, if you ever want to chat about GBA Plus or anything like that, I'm happy to talk about it. I think my team is happy to talk about it. I'm sure Julia too, feel free to reach out. We're always looking at ways that we can embed IDEA and things like GBA Plus into the work that we do. Okay, so that's it for me talking about GBA Plus, and I'm actually going to pass it over to Vanessa now, and she's going to dive in into how we actually use GBA Plus, looking at customer feedback from Voice of the Rider.
Thank you, Melissa. Thank you. And thank you for everyone. Thank you everyone for attending today's presentation. I'm Vanessa. First things first, I'm Vanessa Bocchi, Market Research Analyst at BC Transit. And one of my core responsibilities is to plan, prepare, publish, and analyze results that come from our satisfaction surveys. And as Chelsea explained previously, we ran the Voice of the Rider survey every quarter. However, every 2 years, we run a special edition of the Voice of the Rider survey called Transit Experience Survey, which is the survey when we ask questions related to our riders' journey in transit. From the moment they leave to get to the bus stop to the moment they arrive at their destination. We want to learn from them all the challenges, what works, what doesn't work, under the lenses of GBA Plus, how different women, men, gender diverse people experience transit, and other groups who identify themselves as persons with disabilities, Black, Indigenous, other people of color, people who belong to additional equity-seeking groups. So this survey, the results, they contributed to the creation of the upcoming customer experience plan that Chelsea will give more details later on. And we ran the last transit experience survey last May. And before sharing some of the results, I want to see what you think, what we heard from them. I want to see what you think first. For example, one of the questions we ask is whether the participants identify themselves as an Indigenous person, if they identify themselves as Aboriginal. And I want to see if you have a guess how many riders identified as Indigenous in our last transit experience survey. So feel free to make a guess, or if you know, maybe you know, because I'm sure you read all the pages from my report when I shared it. Oh, I see. Okay, 4. There's a tie. Okay, 4%. And yeah, between 4 and 9%. Okay, that is good guesses. Ooh, tie again. So close. The tension. But I can tell that one of those two is right. The right answer is 9%. So we are actually very happy about this representation in our surveys, because 9% it's higher than the overall Indigenous representation in BC, which is approximately 6%. So that's the number that we are proud of, that we can reach this community and see what they have to say. And I have another question for you. We also ask in our surveys how many BC Transit riders identified as having a disability in our last transit experience survey. How many? What's the percentage? How many respondents said yes, I have a disability? Could be physical, could be a mental, a mental health disability. Everything under the umbrella. Let me see, 15. 15%. Yeah, this one. People seem confident that it's 15%. Okay. Again, good guess, but I can say that the answer is 30% of our riders affirm that they identify themselves as having a disability. So when you look at it, 3 out of every 10 riders consider themselves to have a disability, this high representation. So it shows us how critical accessibility is for a large portion of our ridership. So something that absolutely something to keep in mind in every single project of ours, because it matters. And now that we are talking about demographics and what's the profile of our riders, we have an overall demographic overview. So we can see that how the average looks like. I can say it's pretty consistent throughout our surveys. We see mostly women participating in our surveys, adults. We have participation of minority groups, equity deserving groups, members of the LGBTQ2S+, which is vital for the survey's purpose, hearing from these groups and communities that have historically faced and continue to face barriers to services. Well, they deal every day with factors such as discrimination, systemic disadvantage. So it's essential for us to hear from these groups. It's one of the main things about this survey, and how we work on our projects, knowing that these are the riders that are experiencing our services. With that in mind, I'm sure that many things change when you sit down to work on a project. So that's our intention here, to keep in mind who are we working for. And now I'm going to show you some insights that came from the survey and why it's important to ask these demographic questions. For example, we asked riders, how satisfied are you with the accessibility of public transit vehicles? Are you happy with the transit vehicles that we provide today for people with disabilities? And 54%, more than half of respondents said that, yes, I'm satisfied with accessibility in transit. It looks great. But we're talking about the total of respondents. Every single person that answered that question, the total is 54%. However, when we filter, if we only look at the responses from people who, in the previous question, identified themselves with having a disability, we see that this percentage is lower. So respondents who consider themselves to have a disability, 36% are satisfied with the vehicles. So it's something to look at, because the satisfaction rate drops to only 36. So this 18-point gap is the number we need to focus on, and why we have to dive deeper into their specific feedback, what they have to say about their experience, what are the different comments, what do I get from the overall, from the average, but what kind of specifics, insights I can get from those 36%, and see and not only the 36, but that 18-point gap, what those 18-point gap, what are they saying? That's what we believe it should be looked at. And here's another exercise. We also asked participants, on average, how safe do you feel while riding the bus? And the total of participants said, yes, I feel safe using transit. 83% of them said, yes, it's great. And 9% said they feel unsafe. That's not that too great. However, when we look, when we show the same question split through different demographics, the light blue bar you see shows the yeses, I feel safe. The greens are neutral, and the dark blue are the unsafe. It means that they say they feel unsafe. And you can see that it varies according to different groups. Safe and unsafe results. You can see that some groups, the average of safe is lower than the overall results. And when we dive into the comments from those groups, the ones that said, oh, it's lower than average, we can have some insights. We can see what they're saying. Why did you give us a lower score in safety? And you can see that some groups with some patterns of why unsafe percentages are higher. We see BIPOC people describing situations of experiencing discrimination. We see women sharing concerns about personal safety while using transit, non-binary folks sharing experience with harassment, misgendering, comments based on appearance. So that's the main study, the main analysis we do in the survey. Understand, get one question and dive deep between the difference between the different groups. And we get many insights and even personal stories coming from those questions. I also wanted to share that 40% of survey respondents have experienced incidents of harassment or safety concerns while using transit in the past. And this number is even higher when we look at different groups. Again, some groups, that perception is even higher when we ask, have you experienced situations like that? We see the average 40%, but again, when we look at different groups, we see some of them are higher, some of them are lower, and we can make assumptions and work towards addressing those different groups and maybe work on their different needs, how we can balance that with our projects. So our job, all of this is to say that our job with this analysis and studying this data, it's that every time you're working on a project or an implementation, we have to ask ourselves, who is this serving? Who is experiencing this service? Is this design safe? Is it accessible? Is it easy to use for everyone, independent of how they move, how they see it, how that the writer looks like? So if you can get anything from this presentation today, next project you're working on, try to think of who is this for? And it's not just one face. There are many faces. So if we can keep that in mind, it's a huge win for us and for our organization. And if you are curious, all of our Voice of the Writer surveys, including the Transit Experience Survey, Custom Transit Survey, they are all available on the hub. You have easy access to them. I think Melissa shared the link in the chat, but if you have any questions where to look for a certain question, presentations, I would be happy to help you to find it, to give you even more insights. If you have any questions, if you're curious about a piece of data coming from this specific group, please reach out to me. I would be happy to help. And we do have a template with demographic questions that then we try to make it. Every time we have engagement with the public and surveys, we try to keep them consistent all of our demographic questions. So we have a template of questions that can be asked. And again, I would be happy to share that template next time we have engagement with the public for any projects. You can also ask those questions, and then you can filter your questions and see how they differ when you think about those different groups that are participating in your survey. So 100% we have that, and it's easy to share with anyone. Please reach out to me, and I'll be happy to guide you to those questions. And now we're going back to Chelsea.
Okay, thanks, Vanessa.
Of course.
I'm just waiting for my mouse to show up again. There it is.
Yeah.
So based on all the feedback that we've heard in those surveys, in our pivotal research surveys, as well as our HandyDart custom transit survey, we have developed a new customer experience plan. We also did some in-person engagement with employees for this plan. If you recall, some of you may have attended our open houses. So we wanted to hear from employees as well as local government partners and operating companies what we should put into the customer experience plan. And we have customer satisfaction scores for conventional transit from Voice of the Rider, as well as from Pivotal Research, and then our custom transit score. That's a score out of 5. So we have seen those go up a little bit, but we want to ideally see those go up even more once we roll out the plan and start to implement some of the actions in the plan. So it's a 5-year plan, and it is a BC-wide plan, so it's meant to cover all our communities that we serve, not just Victoria or our Tier 1 systems, but all our systems, and recognizing that some activities in the plan may not apply to every single system, but we really tried to make it all encompassing. And we also included all different types of service in the plan. So it's not just conventional transit service. It also covers the new on-demand service. It covers custom transit and rapid bus services all along that service spectrum. And there's a number of pillars in the plan. So we tried to categorize all of the activities under one of these. They seem to fit under either reliable and convenient, safe and comfortable, accessible and easy to use, or connected to an expanded network. And underneath each of those, there's a separate number of activities that link up to each pillar. We also mapped out the customer journey. So I'm not sure if you can read all of this text, but basically it just takes you through what a customer might be thinking of when they are starting to plan their trip, sort of the emotions they might be feeling, their pain points of making the decision of, where do they get their information, whether it's through an app or a rider's guide, or they're making a phone call or sending an email, and then what they're thinking about pre-departure. So is their bus on schedule? Are there any disruptions in their route? Things like that. And then how are they going to pay? Trying to navigate if they're going to be downloading an app, if they haven't paid in the past, or if they're looking for cash fare or getting a card. Then what they experience waiting for the bus in terms of signage and tracking their bus. And then what they experience when boarding the bus, if it's crowded, or if they can get a seat, if there's priority seating available and they can see signage for that. And then how they experience getting to their destination if they have to transfer or access another mode of transportation, and then reflecting on the journey and hopefully making the decision to take transit again. So we just mapped that all out and started to look at where can we improve that process for customers along the journey. And so under each of the pillars, we have things like up-to-date information and alerts about schedule changes, information about payment, making sure it's easy and accessible, and then making sure the buses are arriving on time, they're well maintained, that connections are efficient, and that their journey is safe and comfortable, and that it is connected to an expanded network if they are moving to another transportation mode or going onto a different bus. So that's just a really high-level overview of the plan. It does go into more detail, so I hope you can watch for it when we release the plan in the next couple of months and have a read. And then we'll open it up to further questions, but we just wanted to ask you one final question. So how can we make BC Transit a more accessible, inclusive, and safe space for all of our customers? And we do appreciate all the questions and feedback today, and that you've all been so engaged in our presentation.